Hi Year 11, so this week's poem that we are going to revise is The Furthest Distances I've Travelled. This was lesson 11. Again, we've gone through this, so there are certain parts that you already have notes on, which is absolutely fine. You can just skip past those points. Obviously, if you weren't in the lesson, it's an opportunity to just catch up with those sections. So the start of that lesson was to look at some of the vocabulary that come up in the poem that you may not have known before diving into this poem. So meridian is the longitudinal line on a map of the earth, so it's that sort of curvature across a globe. Sherpa is a member of the Himalayan people living on the borders of Tibet and Nepal, known for their mountaineering skills, and they act as guides. Lorium is an anti-malarial drug and has been found to have severe side effects. A gyro is a system of credit transfers used in Europe and Japan that involves banks, post offices and public utilities. And those terms come up, so you might want to label those now before you write any notes around it. Okay, so as ever, I will read through the poem, and then if I put up the questions as well, you can start to have a little think about those. If you weren't in, obviously pause the video and have a go at giving your own personal and critical response first, before I then sort of go through and pick it apart and provide my thoughts on the poem and giving you some of the research that I found on the poem. So, the furthest distances I've travelled. Like many folk, when first I saddled a rucksack, feeling its weight on my back, the way my spine curved under it like a meridian, I thought, yes, this is how to live. On the beaten track, the Sherpa pass between Krakow and Zagreb, or the Siberian white cells of scattered airports. It came clear as over a tannoy that in restlessness, in anonymity, was some kind of destiny. So whether it was the scare stories about Larium or the threats of delirium, the boldness that led me not to a Western Union wiring money with 6 words of Lithuanian, but to this post office with a handful of bills or a gyro, and why, if I'm stuffing smalls hastily into a holdall, I am less likely to be catching a greyhound from Madison to Milwaukee than to be doing some overdue laundry is really beyond me. However, when, during routine evictions, I discover alien pants, cinema stubs, the throwaway comment on a post-it, or a tiny stowaway pressed flower amid bottom drawers, I know these are my souvenirs. And from these crushed valentines, this unravelled sports sock, that the furthest distances I've travelled have been those between people, and what survives of holidaying briefly in their lives. Okay, so as I said, if you weren't in, do be sure to pause now and have a little go at those questions. As ever, I've included a question there about the title. So what can you infer about the title of the poem? How do the various line lengths and rhymes add to your understanding of the poem? And what does the poet conclude is the most important aspect of her past travels? So take a few minutes, have a little go at that, and write down your own interpretation to begin with. Okay, so I'll go through and I will give my interpretation here in the notes that I've got so far on this this poem. So again, it starts with a title that's a little bit ambiguous. We don't really know what she's talking about in terms of where she's been. Obviously she's talking about travel, but she's not being specific. So, I mean, it's less ambiguous than some of the other poems that we've looked at, but there's certainly an element of ambiguity to it as well. So we begin with this subordinate clause, and so already we're sort of hooked into finding out where this sentence is going to end. So, like many folk, also quite colloquial language there, quite generalised, and also it's interesting that she does talk about travel throughout her poem. And some of those destinations are quite far-flung places that are not necessarily the kind of common places that you would go to. However, if you're a backpacker, if you've gone backpacking, they might be. So it's not common to a lot of people, but then there's a specific set of people that these areas might be common to. So it's interesting that she talks about there's this division almost between backpackers and people that would choose to go to these types of places, and those that wouldn't and would choose the very stereotypical holiday places. So, like many folk, when I first saddled a rucksack, so this is quite sort of zoomorphic as well at the very beginning, a very unusual sense of travel, so linking into that idea that she goes to these more far-flung places. Feeling its weight on my back, it's quite a visceral description there, very sort of vivid imagery. Feeling the weight on my back, maybe suggesting her strength and linking to this idea that you'd have to have maybe a little bit of courage to go to these sort of far-flung places. The way my spine curved under it like a meridian. So there's already instantly a connection between her physically as a person and then this idea of travel being within her, because obviously that meridian is that geographical link. So already establishing that travel is something that's really driving her, something that she's desperate to do. I thought yes. So we're almost coming to the sort of conclusion of this sentence now that's run on over these over this stanza and into the second one. We've actually got the conclusion of that subordinate opening. I thought yes. It's very sort of declarative here, that personal pronoun as well, making it a personal experience. There's a very definitive and finite a feeling to that as well. So it's very much what she believes. This is how to live. Very simple sentence there. You've got the enjambment as well, so breaking that up, extending a sentence that's actually quite short over those two lines. But again, quite declarative, and there's very much certainty in what she's saying then. On the beaten track, so interesting contradiction there, because if we're talking about beaten, it suggests that that area is well worn and it's used by a lot of people. However, the idea of it just being a track and not a road suggests maybe that it's not used that often, or that actually it is in a sort of harder to reach area. Sherpa Paso, that was one of the terms that we looked at, this idea of Sherpa. So again, maybe linking to this idea of having courage. She goes to these far-flung places, and again links back to the idea of courage when we're talking about that weight on her back. Between Krakow and Zagreb, or the Siberian White. So again, these list of places are sort of again quite far flung, maybe not usual destinations. Siberia is definitely an interesting choice there as well. If you think about, most people sort of would opt for that beach relaxing holiday, but to go to Siberia, which is a very cold country, it's a bit different, a bit unusual, a bit more maybe interesting culturally. So that might reflect on the poet as well. Cells of scattered airports. So there's more of almost a plastic feel to this bit. These sort of in between areas where she's not really travelling, and actually she's sort of waiting. But there's quite that sort of enjambment that we've had so far as well. That's changing the rhythm there as well. Maybe quite a romantic, choppy feel to the lines as well, like maybe her idealised view of travelling, her romanticised view of travelling, and what she feels was going to sort of come out of it for her as an experience. It came clear over at Hanoi that in restlessness, so it's this idea that those in-between times, there's that sense of energy, that excitement, that she's just eager to continue her travel and continue her journey in those wait times, those in-between times. And that rhyme as well, maybe an uncertainty is being shown, and that sort of visual rhyme as well is quite interesting. The sense of fun almost in those lines as well, then through that, was some kind of destiny. So again, we come back to this idea of it being a part of her, that it's something that she's almost like called to do, and that certainty as well in how she feels travel is so good for her, something that she must do and must follow through with. So whether it was the scare stories about Lariam, so again we've got this idea of alliteration and that a sense of fun, but actually brought to quite a serious point here. So Lariam is an anti-malarial drug, but it does have some quite severe side effects. So you've got again this rhyme between Lariam and delirium. So there's almost like a sense of her bringing humour to quite serious issues, which again might suggest that she's quite young and that excitability, and she doesn't really take that threat seriously, and the boldness. So again, that idea of high risks, and she's unfazed by them. So showing that she's quite willing to throw herself into situations, and that might be that exuberance of youth. That led me, so again that idea of control and destiny that links back to the line of the last stanza, that led me not to a Western Union. Now this is juxtaposed with gyro, and I'll explain why in a moment. Not to a Western Union, which is a well established sort of banking system, typically in America, wiring money with 6 words of Lithuanian. So we've got this language barrier, and again you could say that, you know, there's a certain element of recklessness, and the fact she's unfazed by that, and this excitement of travel, which makes it interesting. And we've got again more enjambment, but to this post office with a handful of bills. Post office and Western Union, whereas Western Union is a more sort of well-established banking service, you know, post office suggests then cheaper means of travel and cheaper means of sort of securing her money and transferring and exchanging money as well. With a handful of bills, so again, so that handful of bills suggests maybe a lack of funding, that she's doing this on a tight budget, so which is kind of part and parcel of backpacking as well. That's kind of meant to be the whole idea of it, you know, where you just fill a backpack and you go travelling around different hostels and hotels as cheaply as possible. Or a gyro, so again a gyro, that's quite an archaic use, we don't tend to use that anymore, and it's very much like a debit card system, and you could exchange money and transfer money in the same way that you do with a debit card and a current account now that we have, but it was sort of a cheaper way to secure your money and keep your money and transfer your money. And why, if I'm stuffing smalls, so again quite colloquial language here, and smalls sort of links back to this idea of backpacking and not carrying too much with you, because you would have to sort of carry it all on your back. Hastily into a hold-all, so again we've got this sense of alliteration, there's almost a fun and excitement to it, maybe reflecting as well her rushing to pack away all of her things. Stuffing smalls hastily into a hold-all, and again that's sort of reinforcing this adverb here, reinforcing this idea of a quick pace, fast paced, that it's almost like that excitement of moving on and travelling to the next place. I am less likely to be catching a Greyhound from Madison to Milwaukee. So Greyhound in America is the sort of cheapest form of travel. They're coaches that we would use now over here, very much like, I'm trying to think what we use in the UK. I want to say Travel Line, but it's not that, it's the National Express. So it's very similar to that, sort of a cheaper form of travel then. But she's sort of linking it back then to America, where she's from. But this rhythmic feeling then as well, juxtaposing the idea that she's feeling, she's fleeing maybe. Because when I first read this, the idea of her stuffing smalls, I thought maybe it indicates that she's still financially sort of struggling with money, that she's hurrying because she's sort of having to go somewhere else. It's quite ambiguous really, the reasons for why she's doing that. And I said that then the rhythmic feel juxtaposes the idea that she's fleeing from maybe an unpaid bill. It's quite light-hearted, the tone there in that stanza, which quite a few of the stanzas are quite light-hearted in tone, and there's a certain humour to them. Then to be doing some overdue laundry is really beyond me. And again, continuing with that humour because of this sort of half-rhyme here. What else have I said here? So indicates the end of her travelling life here as well, this caesura, showing that idea of rushing and travelling from one area to another has come to an end. That chaoticness in her life has finished. However, when during routine evictions, so again this made me think that she's maybe continuing to struggle with money, but actually another interpretation there is that she's cleaning up and she's finding parts of her past as she's kind of going through her belongings in the house. And then she makes reference to these items that she finds. So alien pants, I mean that adjective alien may be making reference to casual sexual encounters that she's had when she was having these travels. She's ended up with someone's underwear that she's mistakenly taken. Cinema stubs, the throwaway comment on a post-it or a tiny stowaway. So there's humorous rhyme here as well. So again, linking back to that idea of this part of her life was very fun, enjoyable, something that she has really maybe even reminiscing about now. It's quite something that she enjoys. Pressed flower and bottom drawers. So antithesis here, because we've got this idea of the sort of the laundry and these dull items that tasks that she's doing, then compared with these little items that she's finding as she's kind of clearing up. And this idea of the pressed flowers, that adjective pressed, and the idea that they're kept in the bottom drawer, is there maybe some kind of that preposition with the bottom drawer where it's kept, maybe that unwillingness to reveal itself? Is she maybe reluctant to look back on the past because it's so poignantly different to how her life is now? Maybe there's still a yearning for that time in her life, that she really enjoyed that sort of freedom and being able to explore and go on these adventures. I know that these are my souvenirs. So the idea of souvenirs, that these are items that are effectively have no value, but to her they're invaluable, that she there's memories attached to them and experience attached to them, that actually it brings back a wealth of experience for her. And they have no monetary value, but actually they're very valuable to her. And from these crushed, so again we've almost got a lexical set here when we're talking about pressed, crushed bottom. These experiences that she used to have now have been kind of pushed away and pushed down by the reality of life and sort of growing older, and that she's got other things that she's got to get on with, and so life is getting in the way, and her now that she's sort of older, she's more settled. Talking about this unravelled sports sock, then the furthest distances, so it becomes quite almost philosophical at this point. The furthest distances I've travelled, so what she's found was really important, and what she's understanding now, reflecting back in retrospect, what she's discovered is that the furthest distances she's travelled have been those between people, and it's those people that actually have maybe been the important part and the important aspect, because those are the people that have shared their culture with her, their language maybe, all these things that she's experienced with them. Those have been the important things, that are the people. And what survives of holidaying briefly in their lives. It's interesting now that she's kind of, first of all she was talking about, yes, this is a way to live, and that certainty about it, and now actually it's just belittled to being a holiday. So ultimately she's just been a tourist in these situations. Let me just check, I've got all my notes here. And maybe what was important once seems to have maybe diminished a little bit. That's changed for her, and it was all about the travel, whereas actually looking back in retrospect, it's the people that were important. But it's interesting because there's almost antithesis between the start of the poem, when she's talking about how important travel is, and the excitement of all those different places, and by the end of it it's resolved to this idea that it wasn't necessarily the places that were important, but actually the people, the experiences that she's gained, and quite possibly it could be the idea that how they've changed her, and maybe even in reflection of how her life has changed as well, and those things maybe have not necessarily lost meaning, but changed meaning, because it's not the travelling, it's the people now. It's interesting that she's reflecting back and seeing it in a different light. Okay, so I haven't got as many notes written around this one in terms of generally looking at it, because I've talked a lot about the structure in particular, as I've gone through there with the lots of enjambment, and where we have this kind of rhyme and half rhymes, and sort of adding to that humorous tone. You could also suggest that that enjambment, particularly used towards the start of the poem, could reflect her travelling and sort of moving from one place to another, and not necessarily staying for long in one area. So going on to themes. So again, as I always do, I've just kind of summarised the importance of these themes. So one of the things is identity, and we definitely get that sense that her identity changes as she goes from travelling to then being settled in her life, and reflecting back, having that retrospective view of her travelling. Society and culture, so all those different experiences that she has, and actually she's discovered that it was the people that gave her those experiences within culture and within society, and not necessarily the travelling itself and the places. Past and present, so there's definitely a focus between the two. There's that idea that she's now doing these mundane tasks such as the laundry, in comparison to when she was kind of travelling between all these exotic places, going on these Sherpa passes, you know, and having these sort of wild sexual encounters with different people. So there's definitely an antithesis between the life when she was travelling and that backpacking to the life that she has now that she's more settled. As ever, I have got the links there to some of the websites that I've looked at to get some ideas from this poem, to kind of reinforce the ideas that I had and the impressions that I had, and to show a contrast between the ideas I initially had and then interpretations that I found from others. But obviously I would encourage you to look at as many different areas and different websites as possible, so that you've got more interpretations that you could offer to the examiner. But I hope that helps. As ever, if there are any questions, do contact me on our Google Classroom, or drop me a little email.